Good morning, everyone, and welcome. There's no fire alarm planned, so if there is, if it goes off, go out the rear of to the front car park, but we'll just follow the rest of us. So I welcome Councillor Liz Sneed, Executive Support Councillor for Adult Care and Public Health, and Glenn Garrard as well. Welcome, Glenn. And everyone else we will welcome when we hit the agenda item. So I'll start off with apologies, please, Emily.
Thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies from Councillor Carter, Councillor Lee and Councillor Nicola Clark, and we also have Councillor Parker as a replacement for Councillor Lee. And if I can also note Wendy Bokett's apologies. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you very much, and welcome, Rob. Nice to have you here. Declarations of members' interest. If any members have any interests that they come across throughout the agenda, please let us know. We'll move on to the minutes of the 25th of May 2022. I'd like to confirm that the minutes are a correct record set out on pages 5 to 10. Can I ask for a proposer and a seconder? Proposed by Mark, seconded by Mike Clark. And all in favour? Excellent, thank you very much. Announcements. Well, at the minute we're sort of in the calm period before we get to September, where there will be quite a lot of activity as we look at the sort of reforms that are coming through and everything else. So enjoy the period. So. Okay, so on that note, we'll go on to item 5 then. Yep, sorry. Oh, right.
An announcement of the opening of the quad on Monday morning, which is being run by Adult Daycare Opportunities, and I think it's a really good step forward and getting us back to some kind of normal again. It'll be offering a menu, not quite as extensive as it used to be, but it'll be lovely to have that open again for us to gather together there and eat and socialise, and be a really good opportunity for the students and clients of the daycare centres to be offering us that service.
Oh, right.
So really pleased
about that. That's good news. So excellent.
It is. It's lovely. Yes.
So well, thank you very much for that. So
Thank you.
No, we welcome that. So good news. Right, we'll go on to Lincolnshire Safeguarding Board update. So welcome Justin Hackney, Assistant Director for Specialist Adult Services, and Richard Proctor, Independent Chair for Lincolnshire Safeguarding Adults Board. So welcome Richard and Justin.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to introduce Rick. Rick did attend the board last time, but very pleased to announce that he's formally been now appointed as the safeguarding chair after a very gruelling interview process, which he did very well in. So well done, Rick, and welcome to the post formally. So, I mean, the report is an update in terms of what the board's activity. It predominantly covers what's going to be included in the plan. And also touches upon making safeguarding personal, which is one of the priorities in there. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Rick to talk through the paper.
Thank you, Justin. Good morning, everybody. Hopefully you've had a chance to consider the paper, and what I didn't intend to do was go through it line by line, but if I could just pick out some of the key areas and key issues, if that's okay. Also with the paper is a copy of the Making Safeguarding Personal Action Plan. If you remember when I attended last time, we spoke about this when we were reviewing the performance
Richard,
measure.
can you just bring your microphone a bit closer towards you?
Sorry,
Thank you.
That's better, sorry, yeah. So if you remember, that was after we had that discussion and debate about the review of the performance measure in respect of safeguarding concerns progressing to inquiry. And we have commenced that action plan. It's now making progress towards those aims. So in respect to this report, I suppose, just setting the scene in the background, one of the things that we're very, very keen on doing is making sure that whatever we do is based on an evidence base, really. And I think that's really important because for me, it's really important that we focus what limited resources we have in the right areas to make the biggest difference to the communities that we serve. So during the end of 2021 and 2022, together with the other partnership boards in Lincolnshire, we undertook a joint needs assessment, and that was informed by lots of data, and that data included things such as the type of abuse that was being sustained, locations where the abuse was being undertaken, and we also looked at kind of the profiles of the victims and also perpetrators, but also considering what outcomes of the actions undertaken after the abuse was reported and how we responded as a partnership. That joint needs assessment has kind of brought the partnerships together, I would say, and we've come under one common aim. We've identified that priority of prevention and early intervention is really key to what we do as we move forward. So that's very much about if we can spot things at an early stage by taking action before they escalate into that acute stage of safeguarding, is how I would see that. There's further work to go on that. We're sort of like pretty much in the start of that journey, but we're already considering looking at ways that we can do better things together in those areas. So in addition to that evidence base, we also looked at the annual safeguarding returns, which obviously inform us about what types of abuse are prevalent in Lincolnshire, and also what the responses are to those. But also that also identifies key areas such as settings as to where those abuses are happening. And as a result of that, we've identified 4 key priority areas for this coming next 3 years of our strategic plan. The first one, as I mentioned there, was around prevention and early intervention. And that's really about keeping people safe and mitigating safeguarding risks before they escalate. So we'll be looking at working very closely with the residential and nursing care sector, because we know that's an area of quite high reporting for us in Lincolnshire. We're going to do more work around pressure sores, and again we know that's an area, and if you look at our analysis, that is the highest safeguarding concern referral for us. We'll look at tackling domestic abuse in older adults. Again, we know physical abuse is the 3rd highest prevalence in our area. Preventing financial abuse, which is number 2 on our list in respect of high levels. And we're going to look at that also. We're doing some work with the other partnerships around that area as well. And last but not least is around safeguarding adults with complex needs. So we're really excited about the piloting phase of phase 2 of the team around the adults and how that's going to progress, and how as a board that we can support the actions that are taken. One of the things I'm really, really passionate about as the new independent chair is about our learning and improvement. So what we will be doing is ensuring that we're looking at, the learning from all the exercises that we undertake. So, for example, safeguarding adult reviews, what the learning from those are. Undertaking our statutory duty around assurance activities. So, for example, we just recently launched our Lincolnshire Assurance and Assessment Framework, so we can assess what practices are out there and identify areas for improvement. Looking both locally and nationally at themes and trends and developing more training awareness, so areas such as areas of professional curiosity, the application of the Mental Capacity Act, things that we see on a regular basis that we need to obviously help practitioners address when they're out there working in the field. And we want to evaluate that system-wide change. One of the things I think is really important that as a board is that we have to keep asking ourselves that question: are we actually making a difference? So we need to go out there, test the system, and make sure that what we're proposing and what we're putting forward for change is actually making a difference to the communities out there that we serve. We will continue to work with all partners to improve the quality and impact of their activity and do whatever we can to support them. And as I mentioned before, it's really important that we're constantly reviewing and looking at what we do, and we've got that constant cycle of learning and improvement as a board. Another priority area for us is around safeguarding effectiveness, and that's very much about making sure that our governance, scrutiny arrangements and business processes in place support the work of the board and help us to develop what we're doing. One of the areas I believe that we've got to improve upon is our communication strategy and engagement strategies, and we're doing some work around that so we can look at what the offer is from the information perspective of the LSAB. Another area where we have a gap, I believe, at the moment is around hearing the voice of service users. So we're going to look at how we can work with a lot of the partners of the board to see if we can kind of join in on some of the activities that they have about seeking the views and feelings of service users. So that can help inform the priorities as to what we do as a board. Our risk issues and management process, we have an established risk process where we look at issues and risks and we regularly analyse them and assess them on a regular basis at the board, but that work obviously needs to continue. And we're also looking at developing our assurance dashboard. Currently, our assurance dashboard has two sources of information, which is from the local authority, from the safeguarding data that they send in, and we also get some information from the health systems. We're working closely with Lincolnshire Police at the moment to see if we can develop that, so then we've got that broader picture of safeguarding practice, so we've got a better temperature check as to the safeguarding system in Lincolnshire. And as I mentioned before, our service user and community engagement plan, we need to look at that in more detail and look at what opportunities there are for co-production with the individuals and also the community services out there, the voluntary community sector. Last but not least is our priority 4, which is about making safeguarding personal, and I know we spoke about that when I last came to speak with you. But that's really important that we move that work forward now, and it's really important that we start to provide evidence to know that we're speaking with people at risk prior to raising safeguarding and adult concerns, so that we can understand what their desired outcomes are, and wherever possible work with them to help prevent and protect them from harm. It's important that we encourage all partners, that we encourage the person at risk to confirm what their wishes are that they wish to be achieved, and that we can seek to achieve those outcomes, but they can express them in a personalised way, and we can actually, at the completion of the work that we do with them, evidence that, which will be a key part of the forthcoming assurance process that the CQC, I understand, are going to wish to undertake at some point. It's important that we continue to work together with people to keep safe and prevent safeguarding risks from escalating. The 6 principles of safeguarding are something that we really need to make sure are embedded, and making safeguarding personal is key in that, in respect of empowerment, protection and prevention, I would say in particular. As I mentioned before, you are aware that the review of the relevant performance measures identified the need for partners to demonstrate a more consistent application of the MSP approach, and I'm confident that the implementation of the action plan will start to take that word forward and move it forward at some pace. On a final note, just to say that in light of the anticipated CQC local authority single agency assurance process, as a board we will be an area of consideration in the operations of the Safeguarding Adults Board. What I undertook a couple of weeks ago was an exercise with staff, and we undertook some gap analysis against the expected inspection criteria, and that's identified some areas for improvement. I would say we're in quite a healthy position, but we've got work to do as well to close some gaps before the inspection takes place. And last but not least is we're in the process of completing the strategic plan as it is now. It's in draft form. There was a slight delay while we were waiting for the appointment of the chair, but I'm actually going straight from this meeting to actually speak with my board manager about actually where we progress that further. And on that note, I will pause and ask for any questions that people have, if that's okay.
Excellent, thank you very much. I think you've absolutely got your 4 strategies, priorities spot on. So it's, I think it's laid out very well. You've got a clear direction, and I think you're picking up some of the issues that have sort of not perhaps had the priorities in the past, but it certainly, I think, is a very good paper, and the way you've set it out is very good. So I'll open it up to the floor. So, Rob?
Thanks, Chairman. Can I just pick up on one point? I seem to think you said reference to pressure sore issues. I mean, it's a fundamental principle of care that you try and avoid that, as I recall from 30-odd years ago. To what extent is that still an issue? I mean, it obviously can indicate a failure in care. So I'm just wondering to what extent we have this issue at the minute.
Do you want to speak now? Just before you come in, I think Andrew wants to come in on a...
Yeah, I just want, that was a subject I wanted to bring up. I have to be careful what I say because this relates to a member of my family who died because of a pressure sore. It was a number of years ago. It was traumatic. The pressure sore was enormous. It upset, obviously, the family tremendously. And there was an inquest. But that was years ago. And the sad thing is, have we moved on? These pressure sores, people don't realise how serious they are. Obviously, it's to do with training and people being turned regularly, but also the supplier of the beds and the mattresses that go up and down, they have to have special mattresses. All those sort of things all contribute to these problems, and I'm disappointed, to be honest, to see this is still on here, because this happened to our family years ago. And it's sad to think that families are still suffering. Thank you.
Well, and just on that note, I mean, it used to be a key performance indicator for the NHS, and I don't know if it still is, but it was really how they judged what was going on.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So in terms of the needs assessment process that Rick talked about to inform the priorities within the strategic plan that's going to be published, what we did, we looked at both safeguarding activity information, but also serious clinical incidents that happened and were reported within the NHS. And as Rick said, in terms of the analysis of the serious incidents, the highest rate of those within the NHS reporting was pressure sores. So that's why we want to include it within our, our strategy, because it's a partnership approach, and that we need to, you know, not just look around what's happening in terms of reported safeguarding concerns, but from a wider safeguarding perspective. Now, actually, there is an obligation for, you know, all NHS providers, but also the social care providers, to report pressure sores into the NHS, and there's root cause analysis into how they happened, and hopefully to inform preventative actions. But in some instances, pressure sores also need to be reported as safeguarding concerns as well, and we need to do inquiries. So there's an overlap between the NHS and local authority statutory responsibilities. So it's, you know, it's a really key area where we need to work together on. And NHS colleagues were keen for us to include within the scope of this prevention work not just pressure sores that occur from being in hospital, but also pressure sores that may occur within residential or nursing homes, and indeed within the person's own home as well. So we very much want to raise awareness of this as a matter, and look together collectively as a board to look in, you know, with preventative advice and action, so we can reduce the prevalence of this as an issue.
If I could just come back, that's the sort of thing we were told years ago. So I can't stress how important this is. It is crucial that people don't have to go through the trauma of what happens when people get these pressure sores, because they are awful. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think actually it's good it is on the, because it is a very good indicator of how good services are. Justin? Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I also think it's a really good example of how the LSAB can bring some leverage into, you know, system-wide improvement as well. So having this as a key matter within our strategic plan, I don't think it's been included as a strategic priority previously. So again, it helps to shine a spotlight on this issue so we can all focus on improvement.
Excellent. So, Glenn, then Trevor.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to defer to members first.
Okay.
I'm happy to defer to members first asking.
Okay. Thank you. Trevor, then Mark.
Thank you, Chair. Last night I had the enjoyment of listening to a presentation of CAB and the excellent work that they do. And obviously they're a first point, I suppose, of contact for many people who are in crisis, are in debt, or they've got social issues, etc. But one thing they did raise was around domestic violence and around the difficulties over the last 2-year period of collecting the data in terms of the number of cases coming into our area, which was West Lindsey. I just wonder whether that has been a common problem, because nationally we heard during the lockdown period domestic violence was a real issue. It increased nationally, but like locally, have we had difficulties in terms of collecting data? That's the first thing. The second thing was that on the last meeting, I did raise my concerns around. I'm not fully assured that safeguarding is fully embedded across all agencies, especially some of the councils. And I talk in particular of my own. That does raise concerns. I've raised a number of issues over the years, and I don't really feel convinced that safeguarding has been really seriously considered. But that leads you in terms of thinking, well, cost of living crisis, there's going to be a huge spike in terms of poverty, fuel poverty, food, families being able to actually heat homes, etc. I just wonder in terms of how we're intending capturing that. And I'll use the example just of feeding children. School holidays, a period where you're coming up to a summer break, cost of living is a real challenge for a lot of families. How are we going to ensure that those, say, children are, fed, they're well nourished, and families are able to actually feed appropriately? That's just one basic example. But I just think in terms of, it does raise the awareness that possibly there is a lot more to do in terms of some of the districts or education, or I just think it's an interesting area. It's a huge complex area, I suppose. How we collect that data, I think you're doing an excellent job, by the way. But I think there's, it's a massive task, isn't it? It's a massive challenge for us.
Thank you, Chair. I can answer the domestic abuse point. The council with the Police and Crime Commissioner, the Constabulary in Lincolnshire, and other partners have recently agreed a reprocurement of the existing domestic abuse service in the county, which will expand provision. That goes to Public Protection Scrutiny Committee, but I'd be very happy to bring that here, Chair, through the Assistant Director for Public Protection in the County Council, Chief Superintendent Martin Parker. Data is available. It's also available at district level, and we have increased our analytical capacity in that area. It is a priority given that some 80% of child protection cases have a level of domestic abuse related to that as a preliminary item. So it tends to be cause and effects. I can happily bring that at a future committee, Chair, if that would be helpful. On the wider economic impact affecting children and families, there is a report that went to, sorry, Chair, I can't remember which scrutiny committee, but there has been some preliminary work on that in terms of the wider impact of economic change and turbulence on inequalities in particular. I can try to cover that when I come back to scrutiny on the integration white paper that's coming, I think, in September, if that would be helpful, with respect to inequalities in the council.
Okay.
Any other questions, all the difficult ones, I'll leave to Rick and Justin.
Okay.
Do you mind? Sorry, oh, sorry.
So, did you want to come back on that?
I was just going to come back to some of those points, but
Yeah, please do. Just turn.
Okay. So, in respect to domestic abuse, we know it is an unreported crime. We know that, and you know, so what we can do as a partnership is continue to promote those messages to encourage people to come forward and report those things. And we are doing some work around that from a communication perspective. But you're right, it is worrying that people don't feel confident still to step forward. And we know during lockdown it was a lot of hidden harms going on, so it is recognised. The other thing I was really interested in was, and I've got to say I'm unaware of what we do currently around the corporate workforce in respect of that wider safeguarding. Is that what you were referring to? So things like your tradesmen going into houses, all those kind of things, who could pick up these things. So I'll pick up on that and I'll see where we are on that. I don't know if you are aware, Justin, of anything we do around that.
Not specifically, Rick. No, I mean, I think the other angle of that is the MSP work stream, Councillor Young as well. So it was something, you know, we as a board have picked up that actually around those wider prevention duties, there's a lot of opportunities, isn't there, around, you know, wider partners to help with that. So, yeah, good point.
And just picking up on the last issue about the cost of living issues, it was actually raised at our partnership board last week, which I chaired, and it was raised with, you know, they were talking about exactly the same issues about that cross-cutting effect that it could have across. I mean, I'm unsure again as to what's happening at a local authority perspective, but I would imagine there will be considerations of that's on the corporate risk register that does, you know, does need to be started, kind of looked at and addressed and responded to in some way. So hopefully, I would imagine it's being picked up with that. Glenn may be able to tell us perhaps more about that than I can.
Excellent, thank you. Mike?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm glad to see that you're pursuing the prevention angle at an early stage, because that's obviously been brought up on a number of occasions as it helps the victims or those being stuck with the problem, but also helps us out in the long term that things don't escalate further. On page 11, you talk about the joint working between 4 groups. I'm presuming that's proving to be a success, because it doesn't actually state that by this joint working, you're actually making better achievements than in isolation.
Thank you. Yeah. So the 4 groups are effectively the statutory boards. So that's LSAB, the Children's Safeguarding Board, the Safer Lincolnshire Partnership, and now the Domestic Abuse Board as well. So one of the key things that we wanted to promote as the LSAB is that the opportunity for duplication if all 4 of those boards all had their own prevention strategies, or at least if we were duplicating some of those activities. So the plan is that we want to actually work with all of the 4 boards, identify joint priorities, and as Rick says, the top of the pile is prevention and early intervention, and then actually what we can do is have a common approach to prevention and early intervention in Lincolnshire and cooperate on those activities. It might still be that there are some issues that we want to pursue in terms of the prevention and early intervention agenda that are specific to our own boards, but you're right, the power is working together and actually using the overall sort of resources that are available to each of the boards and the wider sort of networks to address these issues. So absolutely, it's synergy, and that we have to get all of the 4 strategic boards working together. I think there's a little bit more work to formalise that prevention strategy, but work is making good progress. Again, it's probably a good item for a future agenda here when that's when that's confirmed later in the year. And I think it'll be pretty unique actually across the country. I'm not aware of the 4 statutory boards cooperating in that fashion anywhere else at the moment.
Thank you for that. I've got a couple of other questions for you, if I may. I remember being told that on the fire and rescue service, they have training regarding safeguarding. Does that happen within the police force? Because obviously they're more likely to be the first point of contact, and we're often told by the media that the police state them things that they're a social service more than a police force on occasion. And you mentioned there about the 4 groups working together. Do they have a shared database, or is that something being planned for the future? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak as an ex-police officer in respect of the training for the police. Yes, the police are trained in safeguarding, but at various levels, obviously, dependent on their specialisms. But what I would also want to emphasise is that the Care Act places that emphasis on all partners of the board, and the police are one of those areas to actually, you know, apply the principles of safeguarding. So it's really important that they do that. What we do as a board is also we work with the agencies, so we would look at what their training programs are and do whatever we can to support and inform them. But safeguarding is also a moving feast, so the things I mentioned about things like professional curiosity, application of Mental Capacity Act, making safeguarding personal is another area where we're going to have to do some work with the police on as well. So it's a big area, and the police have to wear many, many hats, we know. But safeguarding, I could assure you is a priority for the police. But again, it's about us, how we support them in what they do. In respect of data and analysis from the 4 partnerships, obviously we spoke about what we did, you know, in developing that joint needs assessment, which is a really, really beneficial process. But I think, again, there's work that we need to consider further about the analysis of what we do and what we all undertake jointly. So I think that's another area that we need to continue to build upon. In respect of evidence, there is evidence already from what they call the Q Collaboration Group, and there's some about the work they're doing. So they're looking at where we can reduce duplication of effort, but maximise impact. So things like communication, we spoke about domestic abuse. So there's opportunities for us to come together, joint messaging around safeguarding, around community safety, and actually how we can do that. And for me, another area where I think there's a really big opportunity is around co-production with the communities and actually involving the communities more in the work that we do as boards. So again, I think that's another area that we can progress and develop.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Marianne? Then.
Sorry I was late. Thank you for your report, which I thought was really good. Sorry I missed part of it. I'll read what I can. The question I was wanting to raise is about communicating more, and I think you meant both with residents and with partners. And I just wondered what kind of campaign you might have that we can contribute to as councillors. We are obviously in contact with a lot of people, and it might be things that we can do. Whether you've got small things we can put on social media, or cards we can give to people, or whatever you think is appropriate would be. There may be ways in which we can help. Thank you.
So, Councillor Overton, is that kind of saying we don't really do that kind of stuff? You've not experienced that kind of involvement in the past. Is that it would appear to be a gap? Is that fair to
I
say?
think there's more that could be done, probably.
Yeah.
It's hard for people to always recognise just how much contact we do have with the public. I have 17 parish councils, which I meet almost all of them every month. So that's probably 200 people I'm speaking to, just for starters, before I've started. And those are people speaking to a lot of other people, community leaders. So, and it's the same with all the councillors. We're constantly in touch with a lot of people. And so there are opportunities not to be missed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Justin, you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, the making every contact count type approach that's been utilised in public health, I mean, very much really that's what we want to adopt from a safeguarding perspective as well. So you know, that offers very welcome, and you know, we need to look at all of those other options as well, Rick, in terms of the wider sort of public and, like you say, tradespeople. Anyone who can get those key prevention messages over is, you know, it's an opportunity, isn't it? So the thing is making sure that the four boards crystallise that and what those key messages are really, and getting that information and advice offer out there. But it's going to be a key element of our prevention strategy.
One other small point is about the voluntary sector, and I'm sure you know, but we have quite a lot of lunch groups for people in our communities, and they seem to be thriving. Nearly certainly all the bigger villages have them, and they meet every week. So there's a lot of connections there as well. If we need to get some messages out, that's a good spot. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Do you mind if I just come back in? I
Yes.
was going to ask, Councillor, is it something that we could perhaps look at working on? If I was to get in contact with you, would that be?
Yeah, absolutely. And the council has a strategy, you know, communication strategy, which we can just check that it's the way we want with you.
Yeah.
That would be good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to go to making safeguarding personal. The first point on the list there seems blindingly obvious, but actually I don't think it is. Partners can evidence that they've spoken to the person at risk prior to raising a safeguarding concern. Well, that does seem pretty obvious that you should do that to start with, but when you think about it, it's probably not obvious to a lot of people. They rush to report something, but they haven't actually spoken to the person who's at risk. So perhaps you could just say a little bit more about that. I can understand well why that's a top priority, and obviously it has been since the Care Act came in, isn't it? But I think that's probably more important than it at first appears. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor. I mean, from the work that we've done around our analysis of the information, it shows that this is a real gap at the moment. And obviously, one of the key things is, you know, as part of the Human Rights Act as well, you know, is that we work with people and we, you know, people consent to the actions that we take, you know, and that they, in safeguarding and adult safeguarding, the individual is a huge part of the prevention and the solution to resolving the issues, because obviously we want to work with them, but we can also use their kind of the strength, that strength-based approach, so the strengths that they have, be that through family, friends, connections. So how can we work with them to actually keep them safe? So it's a really, really important priority. And the evidence from what we know is that it's not always evident that actually people are speaking to individuals to get their wishes, you know, because we'd always want, wherever possible, to work with that individual to achieve their desired outcomes.
Yeah, I agree with you. And can I just ask, if a referral comes in and the partner hasn't spoken to the person at risk, what happens?
Currently, it's left to the adult safeguarding team to do that follow-up and to have that conversation with the individual. But as we sort of picked up previously, that's generating quite a lot of additional work for the safeguarding team, that some of it could actually be sorted before the referral was made, just simply by having a conversation with the individual and establishing the facts, if you like, and then deciding whether safeguarding concern is necessary or not. So it really is something that we're really going to push on hard with the board. We're putting in additional performance monitoring systems, changes to the safeguarding form, so that it's very clear whether that conversation's occurred or not. And then we can identify which agencies are having those conversations and which agencies aren't. And then, you know, their senior responsible officer at the board needs to take that back into the organisation to address it.
Yeah, I think the public might think there's a vast safeguarding department at the county council staffed with dozens of people, but that's not the case, is it? So you can't do the job of everybody else. That's sort of the other point I was making.
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, spot on.
Excellent. Anyone else got anything further to add? So, okay, well, thank you both very much. Rather than just sort of ping off the word "it's noted" on a scrutiny agenda item, we are proposing that we support the 4 strategic priorities and the new 3-year strategic plan. And the other thing which I think is quite important, that what we'll do after this, and spoke to Simon about, is that we'll sort of take the minutes and then basically condense them into, in effect, what we would sort of, so when you come back, what the concerns that the committee has raised is in effect noted as a sort of a priority to what we feel actually is a sort of our focus, in a sense, as a priority. But we will liaise that with you, Richard, so that we're all in an agreement, and then that can come back to the next committee as a sort of a reference, rather than just loads of minutes, more as sort of a focused summary. You okay with that, Simon? Yes, Chair. That's fine. Marianne?
Just a thought, as you were talking about the point about talking to the individual first. If there is going to be a police case, you have to be careful not to lead the witness, so to speak, don't you? So I do sometimes struggle with that. I always say to people, well, I can't take up your case unless I've got your specific permission. And so I do start with that. So if somebody says to me, you know, please speak to so-and-so or get in touch. But I do worry sometimes if it's a very serious accusation of getting, you know, actually having muddied the waters a bit. Or do you think it's still okay to go in and with boots or whatever? I don't know. Just sensitively, maybe.
I think you've always got to be undertaking that assessment of the risk of what you're doing at any stage, and it could be when you engage with that individual as well. So I think, without wanting to back the answer, I think every situation is different, really, and you have to judge it on its merit. What we're talking about from people having that conversation, it's agencies having that conversation with the individual at the start, and it relates to when it's been escalated to a safeguarding concern.
Okay, thank you. Andrew, you want to just come back?
Sorry, just one brief point, and Councillor Parker actually did this at a scrutiny meeting I was at the other day, and it just reminded me, on page 15, the table, the print is so small, I struggled to read it, so I don't know whether, I think that's what Councillor Parker had that commented on another report, I do apologise if I've remembered wrongly, but it's very difficult to read for me on the screen. It's just so tiny writing. I don't know whether anybody else struggled, but that's probably just something to bear in mind. Oh, okay. Marianne's on her phone. Sorry. It must be even smaller. But it's probably just worth bearing in mind for these reports. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That's a reporting thing, but I think size 12 font is never a bad font size. I think, you know, I look at so many labels and I can't read half of them nowadays. And my eyes aren't too bad. But, okay, so we're all in favour of the 4 strategic priorities and the 3-year strategic plan. Everyone's okay with that? So, brilliant, thank you. So, right, well, thank you both for coming. So we'll move on to item 6. Adult care and community wellbeing financial position 2021 to 22. For this I welcome Pam Clipson, Head of Finance for Adult Care and Community Wellbeing. So welcome, Pam.
Thank you, Chair. Morning everybody. Just take you through the key points of the report. So we have delivered services within the financial allocation set for 21-22. And that is the 10th consecutive year that Adult Care and Community Wellbeing have done so. We concluded the financial year with an underspend of 2.382 million, and that's no mean feat for an adult care and community wellbeing service when comparing to other local authorities. For a second year, Adult Care did receive additional specifically ring-fenced COVID-19 grants, and that covered costs incurred in both the emerging and recovery from the pandemic, and they're detailed on page 19. Older People's Services did report a financial overspend of 858,000 in year, and that was driven by the capacity challenges we saw in the home care market. Those capacity challenges driven specifically through challenges within the workforce, through COVID-19, but also the recruitment challenges that we are seeing. and that resulted in higher use of what we call interim beds as people were needing to be discharged from hospital in particular. Actions are being taken to reduce both the usage of those beds and, as a consequence, the financial cost. And pleased to say that in Q1 of 22-23, indications are that those reductions are coming in aligned to the plan we've set for the year and beyond. We are proposing to utilise the underspend in accordance with the Council's financial regulations and continue to invest in our housing capital programme. You'll recall from an update previously, we did open our DeWint extra care housing in conjunction with the partners earlier in April. And we have got an investment plan with our district councils and housing partners for many years to come. We are also investing in our day services offer to ensure that we can both refurb the day services for increasing access so that the community increase in usage can happen. And the third thing we're investing in is to further build on the joint work with the discharge pathway with our colleagues within the NHS and community health providers. Going forward, Adult Care Medium-Term Financial Plan is indicating at the moment the ability to deliver our services within our financial allocation for 22-23 and continued with the investments we have planned within our service improvement programme, which includes expanding criteria within our reablement services. And July to August will see our medium-term financial plan updated to reflect the forecast impact of the forthcoming social care reforms, both from a fair cost of care perspective and from a service user charging perspective that myself and Glenn came to talk to you about earlier in the year. Those are the key points, and I'm happy to take any questions, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Pam. Thanks very much indeed for a very good report, and again, it was encouraging to see you coming in slightly underspent. In terms of underspend, I mean, I know we're talking about sort of it's now 10 years where we always seem to have roughly similar underspend each year. I'm guessing just part of that underspend, will that include part of the carry forward from last year as well? Because it's almost to me as if we kind of seem to come underspend by the previous year's carry forward. So that would indicate to me that within a year we're probably spending on budget, but actually the carry forward keeps being carried forward year on year, and perhaps that's the real underspend each year. So comments around that I think would be quite useful. And then in terms of the adult social care reforms, obviously I know this is probably the $64,000 question. But I mean, have we done any sort of preliminary work at the moment around? I mean, obviously I know it's difficult at the moment. We're not quite sure what the government are going to do in terms of, rolling it out, and things may change. Have we done any work at the moment around identifying potentially what cost that would be to the council, and the sort of financial risks that we're looking at? And I'm thinking in terms of not only about obviously the cost of the care, but we do know that we're going to have to sort of potentially double the number of financial assessments we do. So I'm guessing there's going to be increased staffing costs, increased staffing requirements. So I'm just wondering, where we are in terms of identifying what the financial exposure and financial risk could be, and any sort of indications as to how we're going to fund it. But I know, again, that's probably asking you a really, really difficult, almost impossible question. Thank you.
Yeah. I'll take the first question first. I'll take the first question to start with, the underspend carry forward. I think in terms of where we spent last year's underspend, we carried it forward and again invested in our capital programme, and we did spend 1.4 million, just over 1.463 on our DeWint investment. So our carry forward from last year, we did in fact spend in year, and that is part of the stipulation under the financial regs to do so. The driver for underspending in this financial year, if you look at the table on how we've done, is actually within our public health services. And we've underspent within our public health services because of the sheer volume of additional grants we received to support COVID-19 costs, which are detailed on page 14. We received over the 2-year period since the pandemic commenced in March 2020, £90 million just into adult care and community wellbeing. 37 million of that was in 21-22. So whilst we are again underspending within adult care, bear in mind that is after building in a significant amount of additional investment, both to support the services we directly provide, but predominantly our social care providers in home care, residential care, to support with infection control testing. So we did see a phenomenal increase in costs, but they were supported materially by COVID-19 grants.
So in terms of those extra COVID costs and COVID grants, have we reached a sort of the end of the tail, as it were, in terms of funding it all? Thanks.
Yeah, so we have, I would like to say, because unfortunately the 11 plus COVID grants that we got did bring with them a significant administrative infrastructure, both for our providers of adult social care and for our business support, finance and commercial colleagues within the council. We are not anticipating to receive any further in 22-23. However, you'll see on page 19, we did carry forward £4.5 million of COVID monies that we hadn't yet spent. We have got commitments for them in 22-23, because whilst we recognise we are now living with COVID, we have seen impacts and continue to see impacts within our most vulnerable in society. That's not just within adult care, that's our special educational needs advice lines, that's mental health services. Community safety are seeing the continued increase in the domestic abuse services that we referred to earlier. All these sorts of services are still trying to emerge from those increased volumes of demand. So we are forecasting to spend the 4.5 million in 22-23, but by the end of March and no further forward. So no new monies, but we will continue to support those most vulnerable services. And obviously we have seen some peaks, haven't we, in the COVID-19 processes. We still have our monitoring infrastructure, our IPC nurses infrastructure, and some of our testing facilities in place till February, March 2023, just to make sure that we've got the those peaks covered.
Thank you, Chair. Pam's already mentioned the impact of the COVID grants, of which there was 12 or 13 in 1 year, almost more than one a month, identified by the government, which hadn't been heralded in advance, which is an indication of just how effective financial support colleagues how much support finance colleagues have given us in order to max out the use of those grants, some of which are very heavily audited. In previous years for underspends, members will recall that for about 4 years in succession, between 2014 to 2020, there were winter pressures funds which were allocated by the government, which hadn't been, as it were, announced earlier in the year, so they came as a benefit to the council. Those winter pressures funds were typically between 1 and 3 million. That tended to drive underspends. So we have benefited from a number of, shall we say, unannounced grants that the government have given for different purposes. I should remind members that 800,000 is 1 day's expenditure. So 1 or 2 days in a year constitutes our underspend. So just to keep a scale on things. With respect to fair rates, which was the second question Councillor Whittington asked, that's going to come to members at the September Scrutiny Committee. It's work in progress, but we must bring it before the Council in order to hit the government's deadline for an October submission. If that submission is not accepted by the government, then the money will not be forthcoming to support the implementation of the fair rates work. The third element on staffing costs to support fair rates, I think this actually came up in the previous scrutiny, Chair, and I mentioned then that Newton, the national consultancy firm, and a number of councils had commissioned a piece of work to look at the staffing consequences of the fair rates requirements. I disagree with that analysis. The analysis indicated that for a place like Lincolnshire, we'd probably need to recruit between 80 and 100 staff to do Care Act assessments and or financial assessments. In Norfolk, I was speaking to a colleague at the weekend, they think they might have to recruit some 140 to 160 staff. I do not think that is necessary, and I do not intend to pursue that line of thinking. We are pursuing vigorously a new business model for charging, and that should mean that, as it were, by using digital technology a lot more than we do, by improving our processes, we should be able to mitigate the requirement for additional staff. That is my intention, that Pam is currently very busy supporting with other colleagues. Thank you, Chair.
I've got Rob and then Mike and then Trevor.
Thank you. At a previous Overview and Scrutiny Management Board, we had a serious discussion about the use of agency workers and the cost to the county council. I'd be interested in Pam or Glenn sharing with this meeting the impact of or necessity for having social care workers through agencies in relation to the budget and what it would have cost if we hadn't had to employ agency workers.
I mean, I can take that. Yeah, I can take that one. Well, we haven't had agency workers employed as adult care. The majority of the agency where we have seen them used was within our provider residential and home care markets. We had seen an increase across the market in 21-22 purely because of the challenges they faced within the short-term sicknesses as people were at the beginning of the year isolating. And the government issued, I don't know if you can recall, back in December, two of the COVID grants we ended up with were for workforce recruitment and retention. We were allocated one November, December time, and then a further one January, February time. We passported nearly 98% of those grants through to our provider workforce to support costs with agency, but also other retention issues, other retention ideas that they had around with their own staff. So for us, we haven't seen any financial impact in 2012 for agency usage because we haven't incurred any ourselves. But for the providers, they use the workforce and retention grant that the government gave 2 lots to. I don't know if Glenn wants to add anything to that.
Thank you, Glenn. You want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. The latest data which records agency spend in May this year for the whole council was £648,000. Adult care, sorry, Chair, adult care tends to be a relatively small proportion, the majority being in children's. Adult care spent about £125,000 on agency staff within the directorate. Most of these tend to be in hard to recruit to areas, for example, hospitals, where we've had real difficulty recruiting staff into the hospitals for a number of reasons. One, Boston Pilgrim Acute is, the east coast of Lincolnshire is just really difficult to recruit to, irrespective of whether it's a psychologist, a social worker, a nurse, a GP. It's just a seriously difficult place to recruit to. If it's in the hospitals and it's, as it were, the hospital team, we're finding that people are finding it very difficult to work in that environment. It's very high pressure. And we've got vacancies in both community and hospital teams. If colleagues can work in the community hospitals or in the community teams for the same rate and have a much less frenetic environment to work in, they'll choose that. We've given an enhanced payment rate for hospital staff along with the mental health approved practitioners where we've got particular pinch points. We've been able to secure additional staffing there on a substantive basis, so our agency numbers have been going down sorry, Chair, for a number of months now. We've got about 26 agency staff working for us. Compared to children's, that's about 1/5 of where children's are. Thank you, Chair. Oh, sorry, Chair, I should mention that we use apprenticeships with the university for social work, nursing and OTs. And every year we generate some 12 newly qualified people to enter into the work stream. These are people who were previously working for us as assistants. We've been investing in that for over 6 years now, and that has also helped us mitigate the number of agency staff, because these people are, shall we say, oven ready. They've been CCOs, they know what the job looks like. When they qualify with the university, they are guaranteed a job as a qualified practitioner, whether a nurse, a social worker or an OT. And that does also help.
Very good. So thank you for that. Mike?
Thank you very much, Chairman. Obviously, we're reading in the news at the moment about the increase in actually COVID cases. How easy it is for you to allocate funds to deal with, obviously, this influx. And I also read on page 20 about the capital investment and unapplied funds. If I remember reading it correctly, there was £11 million. Could you give us some ideas what we intend to do with that? And there's also, you've got specific projects just under £1 million. Obviously, that's wide open to interpretation as to what you're going to do with that. Could you give us an indication, please? Thank you.
Yeah. So the COVID-19 expenditure, there are people within the council who can sign those off, and for the COVID-19 grants in particular, it's our Director of Public Health Services, Derek Ward. So he has the team within him, health protection team in particular, that are monitoring where the spikes are, what the impacts are, and the funds that we have available to us are wrapped around wherever those resources are most needed, which our public health team would advise and guide on. So our COVID-19 grants are signed off by Derek and team. It is up to us how to utilise those grants for Lincolnshire, as long as they're aligned to the terms of the grants that have been published to us. So it would fit with our public health team and their monitoring mechanisms that they have in place across all of our partners. So we don't just work as Lincolnshire County Council, the health protection team, are liaising with our district colleagues, our health colleagues, etc., into those monitoring mechanisms that they have in place. In terms of the 11.1 million unapplied funds, we have a multi-year programme. If you remember back to the manifesto that we've agreed to invest in 6 housing, extra care housing, maximising independence, partnership agreements with the district councils and our housing partners. DeWint was the first of those, which opened in April. We have had other business cases that have come through adult care scrutiny for extra care housing that are in that planning process, waiting for the start of those builds. But we will definitely deliver the 6 over the life of the medium-term financial plan, and we do have the opportunity to develop a further 2. And they will either be in the extra care housing, which are more focused around the over 55s, or the working age adults, which are the smaller builds focused around your learning disabilities, mental health needs. With the third questions in the other, so we were successful towards the end of the financial year into securing some capital monies to invest in our digital programme. And I think at some point last year, forgive me, I can't remember the month, the digital roadmap came to adult care scrutiny. So the £1 million that we've got invested covers some of our day services that we'd like to invest in, but also the successful securing of that digital funding that we were able to bring forward into 22-23 to help deliver the digital roadmap. Thank you.
Thank you. And Glenn, would like to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Just to remind members, we are in an incredibly fortunate position that we can look ahead 4 to 5 years and identify that throughout all of those years, we will be investing in specialist housing, which is quite remarkable. I'm very grateful to the portfolio holder, who's something of a mission on this, and it's something that will help us manage our budgets long term as well, because the business case for each of these developments is based upon our ability to bend the financial curve for both working age adults and older people. The cost of one development is typically 9 to 13 million, depending upon the scale. So 11 million can only be a contribution, particularly if it's spread across 6 or 7 schemes. We've got schemes in the pipeline that will be coming to this committee before Christmas. There's about 3 more housing reports for you between, I think, October and December. 2 of the developments are at Market Raisin for working age adults. There's 10 there. Welton, Horncastle, Boston, Spalding, and Grantham. So you'll see a very good spread of both working age adult and older people developments, all of which are critical components in the plan to be able to manage within our means. Thank you, Chair.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Good news. Trevor?
Thank you, Pam. Looking at the budget lines, the bulk of the savings on the underspend came out of the public health and community wellbeing service, didn't it? Around £3 million, which is about a tenth of the budget. How did that budget compare to the previous year? And also, to me, it suggests that we're either very good at gatekeeping that budget. Clearly, I don't think there's a lack of demand in those areas in terms of wellbeing and housing-related support, and I would imagine all members have that kind of same thoughts in terms of in your own community, you know that there's a huge demand around those types of services. And if you talk to providers, there's always a real plea in terms of wanting more services commissioned in those areas. So have we been really good in terms of gatekeeping, or have we been really poor at commissioning? And what does the future lie in terms of that budget line? Because that doesn't sit comfortably with me, that we've had a 10% underspend on that budget line.
Thank you. So I think there is a caveat that I will put for both 2021 and 21-22 in that is where we have received the majority of our COVID funding. So we have a budget, yes, of 30 million, but the majority of our COVID monies went into that line. So it isn't that we spent 30 less than 3, we actually spent 30 plus 40 million. the majority went into there. I think it's also on that bit, that's more of our wellbeing service. So we have 2 elements to the public health and wellbeing. We have public health grant, which covers all of our public health eligible services, like our sexual health services, our substance misuse services, falls, etc. We have been very fortunate within the last 2 years through the hard work of the team. We've secured substance misuse grants that have covered some of our pressures within those services. We have delivered within our expectations, but again, some of our volume-based services during COVID-19, like the sexual health services, we haven't yet seen that demand recover fully to pre-pandemic levels. Any underspends against our public health grant we carry forward in a dedicated public health grant reserve because it is absolutely ring-fenced. The underspends we've seen were against things like the wellbeing service, and you'll see in the report for that area as well, there was one performance measure that our provider for our community equipment narrowly missed out on just by 1%, which did drive the underspend up. And we don't know that right to the end of the year, which was on our equipment recycling. So that did drive that underspend as well. But it's a very difficult year to compare purely because of the significant level of investment for COVID-19 that went across our public health and wellbeing services.
Sorry about that. If I leave it on, it takes you don't come into it, so that's why I have to keep turning it off. Well, thank you very much for that. I think there's been some very good and interesting information that's come out, but most of all, a great achievement on the balanced budget. I do just feel that going forward next year is going to be a bit more pressure to try and balance the budget again. But I'd just like to, I think for a committee, that we note this financial report in 2021 to 22, including the overall underspend of 2.4 million on adults and community wellbeing services budget, and that we as a committee support the carryover which is made in line with the Council's financial regulations for the initiative in day services, extra care housing, transfer of revenue to capital and integration working for hospital discharge. So are we all supportive of those measures? So seeing everyone's agreed, so thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on to item 7, 2021-22 quarter 4 performance. For this, welcome David, pronounce your surname, Boa? Both. Brilliant, well done, thank you. And our corporate performance manager for adult care and community wellbeing. So welcome, David.
Thank you. And it's been 3 years since I've been to a committee meeting, so please bear with me. Okay, so just to kick off, it should be noted that public protection has now joined adult care and community wellbeing, but it is outside of the scope of this report, as they're covered by a different scrutiny committee. So we have a few more measures to be reported in quarter 4 for 21-22, which makes a total of 20 measures in the PDFs that you will have seen. Really encouraging in that 75% of those measures, that's 15 out of the 20, either exceeded or met the targets that were set for the year. And I think this is quite a remarkable achievement, you know, given the continued impact of COVID and the challenges that the sector have had. So kind of thinking about where we came from in 2021, we've been working with Empower consultants in adult care for a couple of years now, and they have their own measure of monitoring performance and outcomes. And they have an index that is made up of national metrics, including performance, activity and finance. And their assessment was that we were a low spend, high outcome local authority, which is the best place to be. And of course, met within budget because there isn't high spend available. So that is really encouraging to say that we're kind of in the right quadrant for that performance. Equally, what was quite telling was that when we look at the provider market and the quality, there's no evidence to suggest that CQC ratings of all of our providers in Lincolnshire, whether we contract with them or not, has been adversely impacted by COVID-19. So actually, yes, it's been a massive struggle, but actually they've been able to maintain that sort of level of quality. So we have quality, good performance, and very good finance. And those sorts of messages kind of continue through to the updated benchmarking that are in your pack, where we can see that Lincolnshire compares favourably to all of our nearest neighbour local authorities, generally shire, big rural authorities with a similar demographic and similar challenges. So that's all very encouraging. So when we move on to 21-22, kind of just to set the scene on the levels of activity. Of course, as we saw the national restrictions easing, there was a bit of a surge in demand at the front door, to the point where we've received 20% more contacts this year than we did in the previous year. So that's 35,500 requests for social care support, and that's on top of the 12,000 carers that we've supported, and 4,000 deprivation of liberty applications, and another 4,500 safeguarding concerns, all of which have gone up. So generally, the demand on adult care's time is under pressure. So of course, with that, we've had to prioritise. Particularly with Glenn saying that in hospitals where there's a particular pressure of recruiting staff, that was where the pressures were with COVID, and we wanted to try and get people out of hospital as quickly as possible. So there has had to have been a lot of prioritisation in the system. Now, there's been a lot of developments in adult care around the front door and triaging activity, and that has come about with the introduction of strengths-based approach to work with people potentially for longer to get them outcomes that are going to meet their needs. But as part of that, there is what's called the initial conversation, which is like it says, a conversation with the person just to understand what the issues are. And actually what that's been really good in delivering is a really good front door where we're able to manage more people coming in and actually addressing their needs at that point rather than passing it over to the social work teams that are particularly under pressure. And what that has meant is that there's been less volume coming through to those teams, and the people that do make it through are the people that really need that long-term local authority funded care. So that has been really, really efficient, kind of bolstered by the growing and very supportive wellbeing service. And as Pam mentioned earlier about our equipment provider, they narrowly missed out on their target in their contract, but they still provided an awful lot of equipment where people were in their homes needing some support, and actually equipment was a really quick fix, short-term intervention that could meet their needs straight away. So yeah, I mean, the number of people, number of adults receiving a long-term support package in the year did actually reduce in the year. Sadly, that was a driver for that was deaths, particularly in nursing homes. And we did have some issues with the availability of home care provision, mainly driven by the provider shortages and all the restrictions that were in place. However, that did have the kind of the bonus of people deciding to take their care package as a direct payment, which has always been a priority for adult care. So we have seen a good increase in direct payments where people are empowered to take charge of their outcomes and procure their own services. So, as I said, there was an awful lot of activity happening at the front door with the initial assessment activities and going through to the social care teams. But we have a finite resource of social workers and CCOs that can actually undertake these. And as I said before, the pressure was from hospitals, which would generally trigger an unplanned review event. It was primarily the adult frailty team, so looking after older people, that had to really be conscious about how they prioritise their activities in hospitals. So, of course, all of those unplanned reviews were prioritised. And in the end, actually, the review performance was lower than last year. About 80% of existing clients did receive at least one review in the year. But what that did, actually reading around that, is that the actual volume of reviews that were completed, because of course people can have multiple reviews in the year, that dropped quite significantly. So that's evidence to my mind anyway, as an analyst, that that prioritisation worked really well, and it was channeling that resource where it was needed. Of note, though, it was very encouraging that in specialist adult services, which covers learning disability within the council, and mental health services, which are delegated to the Lincolnshire Partnership Foundation Trust in Lincolnshire, they achieved 95% of reviews and 100% respectively. So in particular with LPFT, they did incredibly well to reprofile all of their reviews and make sure that they completed them all. Now, of course, you know, there's quite a bit of a range there in the performance across the teams, with adult frailty kind of coming in at the lower end, but of course it's just sheer volume there, and it's the older people teams that have the hospital presence as well, so they were under immense pressure. If we kind of move on to the public health offering, there's a lot of initiatives going on, and there's been quite a lot of progress in making sure that NHS health checks for people 40 to 74 are ongoing, and kind of tied into what we're saying about, you know, how important housing is for people. there is the housing-related support service that is continuing to deliver quite well. Two of the areas where we didn't perform quite so well was with alcohol treatment and smoking cessation. Now, the providers have underperformed slightly, but I think it should be noted that they are working with two of the most vulnerable groups in society, and particularly with smoking cessation, working with younger people and pregnant women. But they do hope to make some improvements in the future. And of course, with alcohol treatment, we're seeing a lot more complex presentations, and because of the isolation over the last few years, that can obviously compound the issue. And of course, good outcomes for people takes time and face-to-face interaction, which is been lacking across the last few years. So generally, I think it's a really positive place to be in. We've learned a lot. We've grown in our ability to be to efficiently allocate resources, operating in a quite a good market that's providing good quality, and of course, from a council perspective, good value for money. It does put us in a really good position for when CQC assurance commences. But of course, there's still lots to do, and there's always areas for improvement. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The smoking and alcohol one is the one that just keeps coming back and back and back. But why is it, though, that when you look at it, there's always a sort of, looking at the sort of previous years, it seems though Q4 seems to sort of, the figure goes up, and then suddenly we sort of drop back down on Q1 and then sort of ramp back up to Q4, and the sort of graph keeps sort of highlighting that, I suppose. And the other thing with those two figures, do we actually ever drop the target? Because if we keep putting every year, we do get people that stop, then the numbers get less and less. But I suppose there's still quite a lot to go at, but they are the two areas that do sort of keep coming back. And I think it's been hard work for One New Lincolnshire over COVID to sort of even get anywhere near face-to-face. So it's all been remote working, which in sort of this situation is hard work. But
I mean, it's not an area that I know an awful lot about, but what I would say in terms of the movement through the quarters and then dropping back down to Q1, I do believe it's a cumulative number through the year of people that have left treatment programs successfully. So that is quite normal. In terms of targets, yeah, we can certainly look at that, but I suppose this is locked into a contract with a provider, and we want good standards, and we want to keep that benchmark quite high. So yeah, but I can come back to you if you want further information on that. I do believe the targets have already been set for 22-23, so those musings I'm sure will have been had.
yeah, I mean, Glenn will come in, but I think there is an element here is actually, in some sense, if we don't watch it, we perhaps look at this and keep thinking, well, actually, One New Lincolnshire is not necessarily doing its job, but actually, in the other hand, it could be doing an exceptionally good job. It's quite a challenging job anyway. Glenn? Thank you, Chair. As David indicates, a number of the targets, so reviews or quitting smoking, are cumulative. So over each quarter, you would expect a growth, but for each quarter, there's a target as well. I think it's also important to note that for the last 2 years, we have not been operating in a normal environment. Many contracts were impacted by that. Some actually just couldn't operate. Others became digital. But their efficacy was affected. I think this year is probably because we're still living with COVID, of course, it's a COVID and attempting to get back to normal, whatever normal is, kind of year. I think this one is likely to be a year in which we begin to see something of the impact of the reprocurements
across a range of activities, notably in public health. I would expect to see the review of performance and the carers' performance come back onto target, because those should not be impacted by COVID this financial year. There have been a number of extra investments and changes to the alcohol cessation programme. Again, one would expect that to show benefit as the year progresses. So by the time that David comes back to us with first quarter performance for 22-23, it's probably a good point then to look at whether the targets are being hit now, and there's a good chance that by the end of year for cumulative performance targets, we will be in a good place.
Okay. And when actually, just out of interest, is the sort of procurement period for the sort of one new Lincolnshire for smoking and alcohol?
Thank you, Chair. So a number of reprocurements are currently happening in public health. We were at executive yesterday with addictions, which does cover some of the alcohol treatment programme. A number of the bigger procurements, such as drug and alcohol, but also the smoking cessation and obesity, have just been retendered. A number of them have been retendered for a very short period of time, which is unusual for us, of 6 to 12 months. The reason for that is we're trying to align contract times with North and North East Lincolnshire to fit within the Greater Lincolnshire initiative, so that we can have a Greater Lincolnshire contract that aligns all the timings. A lot of work to buy a little time, but for a bigger gain, Chair.
Okay. Excellent, thank you, that's good. Okay, I've got Rob.
Excuse me, thank you. Yes, the bottom 5, you know, the ones where our targets were not exceeded, or we failed, I don't want to use that word particularly, but I'm interested in knowing what the consequences are. So if we take the people in receipt of long-term support who have been reviewed, obviously a long-term disability or illness means that there's likely to be deterioration in the person's health. And it seems from the stats there that 1,000 people were not reviewed during the period in question. And I just wonder about the consequences, about catching up, for example, and much the same with carers supported, although those figures, the gap is not so big. So it's about consequences more than anything else.
Yeah, so in terms of the 1,000 clients that weren't reviewed in the last 12 months, what we have done is check to make sure that they have a scheduled review in the system, and those will be prioritised through quarter 1 and quarter 2 to make sure that no one is kind of left behind and unseen for a long period of time. I suppose the other thing that we look at as well is whether or not we've had intervening contacts from them or from loved ones with any concerns. But of course, if circumstances do change, potentially there's a breakdown in a carer relationship, or maybe they've gone into hospital, that would automatically trigger a review. What we're talking about here is that there's 1,000 people that haven't had their planned annual review, as almost like a check-in to make sure services are meeting their needs. But in the intervening time, if there were any issues that needed to be addressed, they would be.
So, Chair, this gives me an opportunity for a soapbox moment. Members will be aware that the NHS was allocated 5.6 billion for 3 years to cover the consequences of COVID in, as it were, NHS activity that did not happen during the 2 years of COVID. Some 6.5 million procedures did not happen, and that is why that money was allocated, to try and pick up the pace to, as it were, recover the position over the next 2 to 3 years. which is a major undertaking for NHS colleagues. At the same time, there was a COVID tail in social care that didn't get any government funding, that the latest survey results from my colleagues across the country indicates a backlog of assessments of some 500,000, for which there is no additional funding. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. It's well worth raising that whole point and issue, and as I say, I'm sort of a big believer that assessments should be very quick and fast, so it'd be nice to get that back under control somehow, but I think digitalisation is also a key part in progressing that one forward. Okay, I've got Trevor, and then Andrew, and then Rob Kendrick.
Yeah, thank you. David, I should know this, but just in terms of clarity. So new request for support, the 25,000 people who... 35, was it? 35,000, all right. So, I'm going on the table, so the measured description. The denominator was 25,009. No. Oh, right, that's older people. Yeah, so, sorry. And the numerator, 24,000, which suggests that only 4% was assessed as having a need. Is that correct? I just want clarity in terms of my own mind on that.
I can understand how you've come to that conclusion. Generally speaking, where we've got, say, 20,000, 25,000 requests, we would see somewhere up to about 50% of those people with a formal needs assessment for eligibility. And of course, not everyone that actually has an assessment will be eligible for care. Some people will be able to afford that themselves, so self-funding. Maybe the tab might be picked up under CHC funding from health. So yeah, but you're quite right, within that measure, about 4 or 5% of people that request support go on to receive a long-term funded package, so a direct payment, home support, or a residential placement. So, yeah, I can't really say much more on that. Glenn, have you got anything?
Okay, Glenn.
Yes, so this is one of those measures that actually means a lot to me. The more people who go on to long-term care through the front door is a major financial consequence on the council. The strategy has always been to invest in preventative services, to prevent a growth in the number of people coming through the front door that then translate into long-term care costs, because that's where our biggest cost lies. I'm leading a peer review of Leicester City Council at the end of September. What's particularly interesting is that Leicester City Council has got a growth on budget year on year of between 8 and 12%, which frankly will break the council's bank. The reason for that looks like they've stripped out all their preventative services, which is a short-term fix but a longer-term problem. I'm very fortunate here that members have supported me in continuing to invest heavily in prevention. That way means that we are able to sustain a budget position, without which we would struggle as well. And that's why that percentage is quite low, because we do work very hard, and it's not just us, it's partners, to meet people's needs without needing long-term social care support. And as Councillor Kendrick will know, the Wellbeing Service is part of that.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Andrew.
Yes, thank you. I want to turn to page 45, carers who've received a review of their needs. When I'm not doing this job, I'm a funeral celebrant, and I come across a lot of amazing people who are carers, who have done sterling work, well, gone beyond what anyone could, I think I could ever do. And so I think, and also, of course, by being carers, they're keeping these people out of the system. And my question really is to do with the target. I know we haven't met the target, but the target is 85% of these people have had their annual review. Well, my question is, why is it not 100% target? Because these people deserve at least once a year to be checked on to make sure that they're getting everything that they're entitled to. So I think that target should be 100%, not 85%. I don't find that acceptable, really. Thank you.
Thank you.
Of course, you're quite right. In terms of compliance against the Care Act, every adult and carer should have an annual review. The reality is that all councils are struggling to hit that and are just coping and trying to manage as best as they can. I mean, I suppose in a similar vein to older people who haven't been reviewed for 12 months, there is always that thing, you know, if circumstances do change, then a review would automatically be triggered if there was a crisis point. But also important to note that those carers that are required to have a review annually, they will be getting a direct payment, an ongoing direct payment to meet their needs and to help sustain that caring role. And they do have that ongoing support from Carers First, who can be there at the end of a telephone line to actually support as needed.
Yeah,
I'm with you.
Yeah,
It should be 100%.
Well, yeah, I get your point, and I'm just thinking when we get to 85%, which hopefully we will, we'll have a green tick there, and everybody go, "Oh, haven't we done wonderful? We've met that target," but we're still 15% short. So I really think of all the targets, that's one that's particularly important to be 100%, because I think we owe it to these people who are keeping the country going, really, and keeping a lot of this cost from coming down to us here at the council. So I think that should definitely be looked at as to be increased to 100%.
Important to note that in the future, carers will be very high on the agenda when it comes to kind of joint commissioning arrangements with the council and health. We've seen some massive strides in identifying hidden carers, if you like, as a function of the vaccination programme for COVID to identify carers as a vulnerable group. So, you know, that we're actually reaching more carers than we have before, and hopefully that'll be a little bit more coordinated in future. I suppose a little bit of a tangent, but to try and kind of reflect the contribution that carers are making to the overall sector. I was reading some research recently that said every £1 invested in carers saves £3 for the person that they care for in the system. So it's worth that investment, and that's very much in hearts and minds of people in adult care and public health in particular. But equally, as we go forward with a new scheme of data collection at a national level, there will be more scrutiny and more outcome measures for carers available in the public domain, because compared to adults, there's very, very little in the way of outcome monitoring, and they are so critical to sustaining, you know, the level of caring in the community and keeping that out of adult care. So yeah, I totally agree. I think 85% and 90% respectively for carers and clients is not aspirational. It needs to be 100%. But maybe in the future we can look at that and get our performance up there and sustain it at that level. So yeah, I think maybe next time in the commentary it might be a good point to say that 100% is what we should be aiming for. So yeah, hopefully that answers the
thank you.
question.
That's exactly what I wanted to hear, and I think if we could record that in our discussion today, that would be really important, because I don't want to see a green tick 85% and everybody forget about it.
No, you're right. And Glenn, I'll hold you for a minute because I want to come back in on this concept, but I think I'm quite conscious Mark's going to have to soon go, so I'll let Mark ask his question next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I just want to quickly get back to smoking and the sort of numbers quitting successfully, not achieving the target. And to a certain extent alcohol, but obviously I think with alcohol there's sort of a difference between sort of people who drink alcohol and people who have problems with drinking alcohol. Is there potentially always going to be, with the best will in the world, always going to be a hardcore of people that, regardless of what you do, will never stop smoking, will never stop drinking? And realistically, the only way to stop people from not smoking is to ban all tobacco products. But of course, as we know from when they tried to introduce prohibition in America to ban alcohol, that didn't stop people from drinking alcohol. So I'm just kind of wondering that at some point you can sort of, yes, it'd be great if nobody smoked, but there are some people who, no matter what you do, enjoy smoking and will continue to smoke. So in terms of targets, that must be extremely difficult. So it's just picking up that point. No matter what you do, there will still be people who potentially will always smoke and potentially always may drink alcohol to excess and become dependent upon it. And actually, no matter what you do, and they may very well be aware of the risks associated with those activities, but the short-term pleasure gained from that activity or what they get from it, kind of, they don't then, or perhaps they do associate the possible consequences, but they go for the short-term gain as opposed to the long-term benefit. Thanks.
Thank you. I think that's one of the reasons why, like One New Lincolnshire, sometimes we'll look at it on these targets, which isn't often a fair reflection of the work that often goes in that they do, and there's perhaps a sort of, perhaps need to look at other ways in which we perhaps see actually some of the work, well, they'll come back here anyway at some point soon, but you know, in some of the work that they do to actually get people on board and actually trying to take people through. Like you say, it's a hard thing to stop once you've been on it, and then you just sort of have one cigarette, you're back on it again quite quickly. So, okay. If you want to come back on that. Or?
Yes, please. Yeah, so I think particularly with smoking cessation, the important thing to note is that these are people that have reached out, they want to stop smoking, they see the benefits of stopping smoking and they're struggling. So I think that's an important distinction, yes, because lots of people do smoke and they enjoy smoking, and you'll never change those. You know, that's just people. So you know, it's within the realms of just general public health, isn't it? You know, it's better if people don't smoke, and of course you're absolutely right. It needs legislation. It needs a national steer on how to actually reduce smoking if it is a serious issue. I suppose in terms of the alcohol treatments as well, I mean, alcohol dependency can have such devastating consequences. You know, not least domestic violence and homelessness and all of those sorts of things, family breakdowns, hospital admissions. So actually, you know, we want to strive to try and help those people manage their addiction, get over their addiction, because the consequences are so great to you know, the public and to their own families. And if we can help one or two, then actually that's a really good outcome. It is my view anyway.
I think just on that, maybe next time when you come back, we ought to just perhaps look at a bit of the age profiling of what's going on with cigarettes, smoking and alcohol, just to sort of get a better understanding. I mean, I'm not 100% convinced that I think the youth are actually starting up a bit more than, and actually I think they're perhaps, I've seen more young people smoking nowadays again, so I wonder whether actually it's starting up in the wrong age group again. So be worth just noting a bit more in detail, see if we can sort of try and get this indicator down a bit more. Okay, I've got Rob Kendrick and then Mike.
Thanks, Chairman. Actually, Mark Whittington made well, I was going to make similar comments to Mark's. I think particularly in the case of alcohol, you have the additional issues of dual diagnosis, people with alcohol problems who have diagnosed mental health problems. Compound the two together, I think to achieve a target on that one is very difficult. I mean, I tend to look at this as more of an aspiration than actually a target that can be met, because we're dealing with people sometimes with very complex needs, and I think just to say, yeah, we've got to hit this target, I don't think that's achievable. I accept that we've got to have targets in the contract, as it were, but to say I'm relaxed perhaps is not the right phrase, but I think particularly in the case of alcohol use, or misuse should we say, and the added factors, as I've said, that can be built into that, it's very difficult. You may get a cohort of people who have particularly acute needs with mental health issues as well, to expect them necessarily to pass through the system and be successful in terms of reducing their intake, I think is aspirational at best. So I would support Councillor Whittington's remarks on that.
Excellent. Do you want to come in on that, Glenn?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Normally the targets are set to allow us to strive for upper quartile when benchmarked with other similar authorities. So that's normally the reason why they are as they are. And I think it's an interesting perspective, really, which is my view of targets is that they should be aspirational and they should be challenging, even though we might not, and it's very hard to get to them. There's a danger of complacency if we just try to meet targets that are easy to hit, for me, and I think members would find that more difficult to accept, that their officers are quite happy with something that's less than better.
Yeah, agree. Mike?
Thank you, Chairman. You touched on it already about hidden carers, and I was wondering, besides what COVID gave us some information, is there any plan or programme going to be put forward to try and find how many other people are caring for people at home that we're not aware of, so that we can then offer some form of assistance? And then following on from the other comments that have been made about people suffering from smoking addiction, alcohol addiction, I haven't heard or not aware of gambling addictions. Do we deal with that in any shape or form, or does that just fall in where it's combined with other addictions and people have just got multi-problems that we're trying to deal with? Thank you.
Very valid point. Glenn?
Thank you, Chair. Gambling tends to be picked up under public protection and trading standards, particularly, but we don't have a specific target in the corporate plan for that. But I'm happy to take that back to public protection colleagues just to see what the numbers look like and whether we should give it more profile.
Yeah, I think it would be a good thing to just go back to them just to see what is the situation, because it certainly has an impact on people's lives. And it's certainly, its advertising is absolutely widespread on television, promoting it. Okay, so on that, we'll come back to the carers' comments and views. I would agree that actually, in theory, we should be 100%, although I think there'd always be a reason why you'd never get to 100%, because there'll be 2% of population for some reason, things have changed or hard reached or something. But where I also come back with this is, we talk about prevention. Actually, the quicker the assessment's done, the quicker their needs are met, and the quicker actually we perhaps put in preventative action to stop them declining further. So I sort of, and with looking forward into our sort of magic ball, we do know that assessments is now going to become absolutely quite a thing, a challenge with the sort of care reforms. Are we geared up, really geared up to sort of try and really speed up assessments through digitalisation? Have you got, in effect, have you got enough resources, money and everything to sort of really take on assessments? as well as responding to Andrew's bit on the carers as well.
Thank you, Chair. So, do we have enough? No, we don't. If we stay as we are, we won't succeed. That's one of the reasons why new models have to prevail. And the more forward-thinking councils are looking at what those new models need to look like. It's also something that's been of significant interest to the government. In the Social Care Reform White Paper, in the Integration White Paper, there is additional funding from the government to test out new models. If we continue to do what we've always done, then we will continue not to meet the needs of people as best we could, in my view, and that's something that many of my colleagues agree with. It's one of the reasons why we are applying new models. David mentioned initial conversations that operate proportionate assessments, because not everybody needs a full-blown assessment. That has allowed us to manage increased demand at the front door with, as it were, still good performance on assessments. It's also why we're pursuing new models with the occupational therapy service, because it's probably the biggest area of backlogs for us, both health and social care OT assessments. And there's some current work to integrate occupational therapy across the county and the 5 employers of OTs in Lincolnshire. The primary care networks, the acute trust, Lincolnshire Community Health Services, ourselves. We're all employing OTs, but they all do different things and don't necessarily operate at the same standard with the same risk thresholds. What that means is the same OT, the same person can see different OTs employed by different people and get a very different outcome. That's expensive. It's also a bit of a runaround. So we're looking at alternative models, some of which are about integration with the NHS, that mean we're better able to support people without requiring a lot of, as it were, transaction cost. It's also why digital is so important. It's also why housing changes are so important. Without these, then the money that we have won't be enough.
Excellent. Okay. All okay with that? So I think we're just looking at this, that we all accept and agree with what's been said in terms of the indicators. And I think some perhaps do just want, perhaps as we accept, like smoking and the alcohol do have their constraints, and I think the carers one does want to sort of be, the 2 carers one, we do want to see back in green as a sort of priority, I'd agree. Mike?
Thank you, Chairman. It was the point you just made about carers. I'm still concerned about hidden carers, ones that we don't know about, that are struggling on at home and dealing with people, because we've got a list of the carers who are paid, but how many carers are at home that we're unaware of? And I think that's an area that maybe we should, I don't know how we would try to make contact with them, or how we get them to come forward to let us know that they're in that situation. Thank you.
The unsung heroes. Glenn?
Thank you, Chair. The demographics in Lincolnshire suggest over 80,000 informal carers. And on average, before COVID, because the COVID 2 years were really weird in terms of numbers, we were serving some 10,000 carers a year. It has to be said that most carers do not want our support. Most carers do not want us involved in their lives. The ones we target tend to be the ones most in need, and there's some good evidence for that. We recently did a media campaign with Carers Week that Councillor Bowkett was quoted in, and colleagues from communications led on that. John Giblin isn't with us today. So we do campaigns. We are regularly putting out material through both NHS channels, district councils, and the Carers First strategic partner, who does most of the work for us, also runs campaigns in the villages and market towns. But by and large, I think we've probably got most of the people that we would expect to see. If you compare us with other councils, our penetration rate on the carer population in Lincolnshire is typically half as much more or double what other councils are achieving. So if you compare us with Derbyshire, Derbyshire serves about 4,500 to 5,000 carers a year. We're over 10,000, and Derbyshire's a similar population size. So again, our penetration rates in that population are significantly higher than most of our other colleagues. And that's because we see it as a preventative service. So we tend to spend more on that. But there's always room for growth. Thank you, Chair.
Brilliant, thank you. Andrew?
Could I just add, though, on Derbyshire, they reviewed 100% of their carers' needs, where we only reviewed 73%. So they may have a smaller number, but they reviewed everybody that they had under their care, because they're the top performing council according to the table. Thank you.
So, is there any particular reason why, or is there just...
It's exactly the same debate that we have with the reablement service, where we could reable 100% of people if we only reabled 10 or 20, but we choose to reable thousands. I'd rather have a higher penetration rate and accept the criticism that we're not reviewing as many as we should. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So, okay, well, thank you, David, for that, and we'll see you next time. Thank you. So we'll go on to the work programme. I've got a few bits to add, actually, while we've done today's meeting, Simon, but I'll let you start off.
Thank you, Chairman. If I could ask the committee to look at page 70 of the pack. I hope I'm not stealing what the Chairman is about to say, but during the course of this morning, we'll be adding an item on fair rates to the 7th of September meeting prior to the required submission to the government on the 14th of October. And the other item that we picked up during the course of the morning is the domestic abuse strategy, which I think would probably be aiming for the 19th of October. Just a clarification on page 71, the to be confirmed on the Care Quality Commission, I have been advised that they will be able to put forward an item. It's just I understand that they're having a reorganisation, so I can't actually put the name of the person in the box yet. But that's all I need to say, Chairman. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. The item, I suppose mine really relates to the 7th of September. As we have Derek Ward coming to talk about the all-age obesity strategy, can we ask Derek if he can give us an update on his new role in terms of, while he's here, of the whole sort of greater Lincolnshire joined up approach? It would be nice to get an update while Derek's here. And also, as you mentioned, we're aligning some of the contracts together. It'd be quite nice just to get a feel and a flavour for what's happening with that on an updated situation. And as you're coming with the fair rates review and progress on that, can we just have a sort of an update focus in terms of the assessments and, in effect, the sort of, as we talked about, your occupational therapists, etc. But I think assessments is key, and I think just an update, and if we do need to highlight it and escalate it up to the executive as a sort of just as a sort of extra support, that's where I'm coming from. So I think it's key that we don't get behind on it, and if it does need escalating, then we're in a good place to do it here. So are we all okay with that? Excellent. Thank you very much then, and that's the end of the committee today. So thank you all, and have a good summer. We'll see you in September.